Okay, hello everyone. It's so nice to see so many of you, and thank you for turning up and being interested in lyra viol music. I would like to talk to you today about. I said on the announcement about the lyra viol music from the Merro part books. And of course, anybody who is familiar with these part books will know that that is months worth of conversation, over 450 different pieces for lyra viol. It's one of the biggest and most important sources that we have. So I'm only going to talk about like 6 pieces maximum today. So don't worry. To give you a little bit of background, John Merro was a singing man at Gloucester Cathedral, and as I understand it, Andrew Ashby's suggestion was that the books were compiled between 1609 and 1639. The thinking is that the books were compiled primarily for his own use, but of course the part books in question are they're 3 part books, and they contain music for 1, 2, and 3 viols, ranging from normal 3-part fantasias to 3-part lyra fantasias and lyra duets, and some incredibly virtuosic solo divisions and some sort of viola bastarda style pieces, things that we wouldn't necessarily describe as lyra viol music, but which are notated in tablature, and then things that are definitely lyra viol music. The manuscript is incredibly rich and poses a whole lot of questions, and there is luckily a lot of excellent research available on it. Many articles have been published, of course, in the VDGS's own journal. I'm not here today to try and bring anything particularly new musicologically to the conversation, but I would like to talk to you about the more sort of practical side of realizing some of the pieces and some of the kind of performance questions that we run into when engaging with this repertoire. As I said, Merro was a singing man at Gloucester Cathedral and a very avid music copyist. He copied several sets of part books, some of which were definitely used in the music making at the cathedral, some of which were used probably in a kind of educational setting, and then several of the part books were then brought to Oxford to the music school in the 1670s, if I remember correctly. What they were used for then, I would be very curious to know how many people were playing these kind of coprario lyra trios there. But one of the first suggestions I'd like to make about Merro, about who he was and what he was doing, was that I think what we see here in these manuscripts, in my gut feeling, is the work of an avid libraryist, of an avid collector. He was clearly exposed to a lot of different sources and tried to copy as much as he could. I don't necessarily think that he would have played all of the pieces that are in these books. Much in the same way that I think, if we are all honest, we haven't all read all of the books that we have on our bookshelves behind us in these Zoom meetings. And that doesn't mean he didn't play any, but the reason I say this is because when you look through the pieces, there are a lot of pieces with obvious corrections. Sometimes these corrections are of relatively obvious mistakes where the correction is not absolutely necessary, but the fact that there is a correction suggests to us, of course, that the piece was used. But there are also a lot of pieces where there are quite obvious mistakes and some not so obvious mistakes which were never corrected. There are pieces like, of course, the Byrne Scaris duo, where one part just sort of trails off and is not finished. Also, the beautiful anonymous setting of the Dowland Lacrimae in Alfonso III tuning is just sort of distressingly stops towards the very end of the C section. Not that you couldn't figure out the end of the version of the Lacrimae, but It'd be nice if it were there. So I feel one of the problems that we encounter when looking at this manuscript is this understanding that he maybe wasn't always thinking as a performer as he was writing down the things that are on the page. So that it's really, you really see the act of copying present on the page. And one of the ways in which that kind of presents itself is in some of the, I don't want to say inconsistency, but the variety of ornamental markings that he employs. It starts to make one feel that perhaps he was copying the ornamental symbols that were in the example that he was looking at, less than him kind of writing in the ornaments that he himself as a musician would have liked us to play. There are, I'll come to exactly what, well, I'll come to some examples of that as I start playing through for you. So one of the things that so what I would like to do for you today, yes, that's what we're here for, is to focus on one of the sections of the manuscript that contains some of my favorite, most intriguing pieces for solo lyra viol, and that is the section which is in the PDF handout, which you can download from that Dropbox. Let me know if you're having trouble seeing it or something. This is the kind of first section in the manuscript that's a big chunk of solo lyra pieces, and it's all in Alfonso way. That's F F H F H. I think now the best thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to start this live stream, and then I'm going to play a prelude for you and talk to you about some of the ornamentation choices involved in it. Hello again. So I'm going to start here by playing this, the very first anonymous prelude on page 1 of the PDF. Yeah, I'll play for you first. It seems like it's working. As you can see in the PDF file, there's a couple of different ornament symbols that are used here. The very first one is this little horizontal line. Merro is a little bit not always so specific about whether that line is slightly curved or completely vertical. And there's a couple of different sources that we have for lyra viol ornamentation.
We have there's a little table of ornaments in the back of the mantle tablature where symbols are given names, but the names aren't really explicated. There is the huge table of ornaments in the Manchester book, which contains names and explications. There is, of course, the other ornamentation information from Dr. Coleman that we see in Simpson and repeated in Playford. There are a couple of other sources. The manuscript numbers escape me at this particular moment. So, to cut a long story short, we don't have a table of ornaments that is specifically appropriate to this manuscript, so we have to use the clues from the other sources that we have and combine them with our kind of intuitive understanding of the structures in the pieces in this manuscript to try and piece together what either Merro understood these ornaments to mean or what the person who he was copying understood them to mean. And so in this particular piece, in this piece, we have these small little vertical lines, which many sources suggest there's some type of either small beat, just either a or. And the way that Merro uses them, it's not always incredibly clear whether it's supposed to be from above or it's supposed to be from below. My gut feeling is that it is largely. Everybody should be on mute. Okay. The thing that I wanted to talk about in this particular piece is the ornamentation symbol, which we see for the first time on the 5th line. It is when there's a series of dots circling the letter in a little kind of semicircular thing. Manchester, and I think also Mansell maybe, suggests that this is, you see it over an E, it's a return to lower note and then go back to the note itself. One of the very interesting things is, I would hope if somebody could correct me on this, but I'm not familiar with any historical sources about ornamentation that speak about exactly how these graces line up temporally with what's going on. And so one of the things that I'm struggling with at the moment is trying to work out basically how much things are before the beat or on the beat, I guess is a very simple, more modern way of putting it. So I'm just going to play this little section again. I, in this case, put the grace kind of at the end of the beat because it felt like it was a nice linking feature, but here are 2 different ways. And then here would be putting it sort of more on the beat. Which is not horrible, but it, to my taste, interrupts the line a little bit. To this question of direction, I'm going to slide across to the page 3 of the PDF handout. At the bottom of it is another anonymous prelude. And here we see lots of these little horizontal lines that suggest the beat. And as I said, to me, there's not a lot of that the way Merro uses it is not necessarily direction specific, but in this particular piece, it feels very much like the place you're coming from, what you played on the note before, is very informative as to whether the ornament should be on the thing above or below. If everybody could mute themselves, then nobody should have problems. Here's another anonymous prelude. Very good point John made. Sorry that things are all a little bit delayed here. About putting the ornament on the beat sounds more like the keyboard ornamentation of the period. Excellent point, actually, had not occurred to me. But I might counter to that. It sounds like the way we commonly perform the keyboard ornamentation of the period. Not that I'm finding fault with it. Anybody who is familiar with Merro will also be amused at the fact that I was constantly playing the wrong open string there in the last two lines. As you can see, I'm reading from a 5-line staff and not a 6-line staff, and sometimes it's not always so clear whether the low string below the staff is the 5th string or the 6th string. It's a mistake. It's a trap that I fall into every once in a while. Now I'd like to move forward to one of my absolute favorite pieces and my kind of my personal favorite discovery of the last 2 years that I've been working on this music a lot, is the Anonymous Fantasia, which is on page 5 and 6 of the PDF. This piece to me is just absolutely astonishing. There are a couple of small mistakes in it that I haven't corrected in the version that you have in front of you, but I thought maybe I might kind of isolate one of them to just illustrate a little bit this sort of process of trying to make sense of a manuscript where we know that the copyist is a little bit inaccurate. So I'm going to play, let's look at the 4th bar of the 2nd line. What we have written there is sorry. Which does sort of, work out. It's not a glaringly obvious mistake, but one of the mistakes that Merro often makes is leaving out or getting wrong the rhythm, even when he gets even when he does get the notes right. And so what I would suggest here is, instead of that, because then by just kind of adding in a missing 8th note and a missing quarter note and another missing 8th note, it's quite a bold suggestion, I know, but then it resolves a kind of otherwise slightly lumpy feeling bar into something where you have this beautiful consort-like imitation between the two voices. I'm going to play this Anonymous Fantasia for you now. again, sorry. So you see, this is like a super virtuosic. All of these lovely feels incredibly luty, or what we think of as being luty, but maybe it's actually part of our own instrumental idiom that we've kind of completely that we forget about. I'm going to swiftly move along into back into talking a little bit about ornamentation. That piece is kind of unique in that it has absolutely no ornamentation symbols in it whatsoever. Whether that opens a can of worms about ornamentation in fantasias versus dance pieces, I'm not going to open that can of worms. Sliding through, I want to talk about these some pieces by Shirley, but well, yes. Let's talk about the Pavan by Shirley, which happens on page 9. One of the things that's really interesting here, and this is kind of one of the things that makes me feel like Merro was really just copying the ornamentational symbols, is that so many notes have a little dot underneath the letter in this particular Pavan. That is in the Mansell manuscript identified as a symbol meaning a pull bow or a back bow. There's one of the other manuscripts in Cambridge which uses the dot to mean a push bow and a line to mean a back bow, helpfully. But in this case, it looks very much, if we look at like the second bar, that C, 8th note, has a little dot underneath it. Everything that feels like it ought to be or could be a back bow has this dot. There's also some really interesting questions just here in the very first bar about rhythmic placement of the ornaments. So I'll just play the very first phrase. Again, 2 different ways. So that is, I guess, putting like an accented grace on the second note of the bar, and then our little 5 circles are then, in this case, realized that way instead of. But here would be another one. My instinct is what I played the first time, but I don't feel at the same time that I am like correct, or that I have any kind of like absolute historical accuracy or certainty to support that. So I'm not saying that that one of these ways is the historically appropriate rendition of the piece and the other way is not. But what I guess I'm suggesting is that the more time that I spend with this, the more I kind of start to feel that the kind of temporal placement or metrical placement, I guess, of these symbols was perhaps a little bit more flexible. I want to have a bit more conversation with you all, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and look at this piece by Daniel Farrant on page 12. There's one other source for this piece where, which is full of mistakes, where the first section has a repeat sign at the end of it, and the middle section in both that other Cambridge source, which is at the back of your handout, and this manuscript, the Merro part books, the final section is written out as a repeat. And so this has kind of prompted the designation of this piece as a pavan. I would suggest that it might, it feels more like a fantasy to me. It reminds me a little bit of some of those Tompkins consort pieces, where you have these descending chromatic end sections which are then repeated on themselves. In Merro, the first section isn't notated to be repeated. There's not a double bar line anywhere either. And in fact, some of the phrase lengths in Merro are a little bit longer than they are in the Cambridge manuscript 5.20. So one of the other things that's particularly interesting here is the Cambridge source has absolutely no ornaments in it whatsoever. And the copy in Merro has loads of ornaments, really specific ones. In the second line, we see a double hold, making it clear that like both of the fingers being held down should be of the left hand are holding, and not just one of the fingers. So we have single holds and double holds. We have the sort of the beats and the falls and the things that we've seen before, but then also this is, I guess, what everybody's wondering with this one is that we have all of these cross-hatch, some number signed hashtags, whatever you want to call them, underneath the notes. I know that some people have interpreted this as a kind of bowed tremolo, as a bowed shake. It doesn't really look exactly like the bowed shake ornament in the Manchester, which is more of an X of rotated kind of 90 degrees. I have tried it both ways. I'll play a little bit of it both ways for you. I have arrived at something that feels almost more like kind of sticking my head in the sand and ignoring it a bit. But I have this suspicion, and I'm not sure exactly literally what it means, how it plays out, but I have this suspicion that the symbol does have something to do with the bow, but that it has more to do with an indication of the importance of sustaining two independent voices, but really sustaining. So it's kind of like the opposite of that arpègement symbol that Marais uses. That's my kind of working concept for this ornament sign at the moment. But I'll just play a little bit of the kind of relevant section before we start. So this is. That's the way that Vittorio Gelmi has recorded it. It's cute. I can't find a way of making it work for me. So I try and just sort of hold these lines and stick with this sustain idea. I'm going to play the piece now. restart itself, I will restart myself. So, Pavan, called Pavan. I'm proposing that we rename it a Fantasia, but probably it's too much trouble to rename it. But fantasy-like Pavan experience from Daniel Farrant. I really want to have some conversation with you, so I'm just going to point out one more thing about this section that I found quite fascinating quite recently. Over on the next page, we see 3 pieces, each of which takes 2 pages. The first one is unmarked. It is in the index suggested to be a Pavan by Joseph Shirley. The next 2 pieces are an Almain and a Galliard by Joseph Shirley. And then this section of the manuscript sort of finishes with a bunch of dumps. A piece called Jemmy, which is also in the manuscript books, just sort of fun, cute variations on grounds. And then there's one later edition of a harpway flat piece, and then a nice setting of Robin. But it's all there to play through if you'd like to. But the thing that I want to talk about very briefly is this set of 3 Joseph Shirley pieces. They are so beautiful, just like all of his other works in this section. When I was first reading through them, I actually thought that the Pavan and the Almain, without realizing the Pavan was a Pavan, I actually thought that they were the same piece, but just maybe 2 different versions, because they were melodically and structurally so incredibly similar. But then I looked at the index and saw the attribution Pavan, and then the penny dropped, and it all made sense that actually what's going on here with these 3 pieces is the same exact thing that Ferrabosco does in his lyra viol publications, where he has, let's say, like an Almain at the top of the page, and then the same melodic material transformed into a Coranto at the bottom of the page. Shirley appears to be doing very much the same thing here, even though each one of them is a 3-part piece, which has a normal and a double, or ornamented A section following each of them. I haven't learned this whole thing yet, so I can't play it for you, but I'm just going to play the A section of the pavan, the first A section of the pavan, and then the first A section of the almain, and then the first A section of the galliard to kind of illustrate this. Actually, no, first I'll just play the first couple of bars to make it even clearer. Well, tune. Pavan. Almain, a little bit messy, sorry. Gallia. So the commitment to this concept that Shirley is using here is actually much greater than that he holds on to this idea of really like keeping the melody the same, the melodic structure, the idea is the same, and putting it into the structures of different dance forms, even more so than the Ferrabosco thing does. As I played this, I realized that there's a really kind of interesting problem to point out about this, the ornament that is the X. Maybe that's called the elevation or the slide or the fall or whatever. They all have so many names. We normally see it as, and it's very rare that you see it on any fret lower than D, because you need to be able to play two notes underneath it. But here in the second bar, the C has the X in front of it. And so I played one possible resolution is to allow that elevation to come half from the arpeggiation of the chord and then half from putting the finger down. But then the question remains, how much do we sustain and how much do we I don't have an answer, but I think a lot of the beauty in playing lyra viol music and in realizing both the music itself and in kind of starting to come to grips with the practical execution of these ornament symbols, I think rests there with that problem, with this gray area of timing placement and arpeggiation placement and level of sustain. I think these are all kind of aspects of playing which we could all do to kind of dive into with a lot more subtlety and color. Okay, there ends the YouTube live broadcast segment of the thing. Thank you for your patience with it. I hope it sounded nice and I hope it wasn't too confusing. Now I'm going to turn off the YouTube and we'll go back to Zoom and we'll have a normal Zoom call and we can chat.
Yes. Oh, okay. Does anybody have some questions? Type them in the chat, maybe?
I'll start, Liam.
Thank you.
Okay, very basic question. Thank you very much. That was excellent. Really great. Sound quality, picture quality. What's the tuning that you're currently using?
So this is Alfonso Way, which also FH. So.
And at what pitch? Because how does it translate to notes?
So the top string could still be understood to be a D at 462. You could, that pitch goes by a variety of, that frequency goes by a variety of names in different contexts. But
yeah, that's why it sounded like E to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it would be a 415E, let's say. Um, Pitch frequency with lyra viol stuff, you get to really choose what feels right for your instrument for your piece. I play some stuff at around this area. I play other things lower. It depends on what strings I've got on. At the moment, this bass is a copy of the John Rose in the Kessler collection, made by Mark Suberom in 2012. It has a string length of, I think, about 66. I keep sliding the bridge around. I'm very bad. But I think it's about 66 at the moment, which is, of course, very short for playing these kind of low lyra tunings. But it can work. The more nervous I am, the less the low strings work. So people are familiar with that phenomenon. But when I'm really just kind of playing alone and really enjoying it for myself, the low depth things don't, it tends to be quite happily. The bottom string is 4 millimeters thick, and the second lowest is 3 millimeters thick. I mean, they're very, very thick. I kind of wanted to try going too far in that direction to see what happened, but it didn't feel like too far. And as an anecdote, I had a gig at 465 recently where I had to play this instrument in normal tuning at 465. And I was planning on getting rid of the giant super thick bottom strings, but I figured it would just be ridiculous. But of course I'm very lazy and I'm very last minute. And it was the night before the first rehearsal and I still haven't finished.
I'm going to stop you early. I'm sorry. It might be just me, but there's a kind of whooshing sound and you're sort of gradually fading out. So that's better.
Yeah.
Getting better. Getting better.
Can I ask a question, or should I do I have to wait?
Please.
So I have two questions, very difficult questions. The first question is, in manuscript 247, there's a whole series of Ferrabosco preludes, 4 of them.
Yeah.
And the fifth one is the Lacrymae. And I don't know what you feel, Liam, but when I was working on the Lacrymae, I felt it sounded so much like Ferrabosco was arranging that piece. And it's also so highly ornamented. And I've had different opinions. I would like your, can you hear me, Liam? Liam, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Did you hear did you hear the question, or should I repeat it?
Yes.
So it's so highly ornamented, and it follows this 4 Ferrabosco preludes, and I would like to know your take, or anybody else's take. Joel, or I see Dr. Ashby is not with us. And the second question I had that we've brought up before on the lyra viol Facebook page is Mace makes it very clear that any sort of shake starts with the main note and followed afterwards with the upper note. And we had some discussion already on Facebook about this. If you take the lute music to be the source, I've always tried as much as possible to start my trills on the main note, like the lute music. But maybe in the context, I see, like you, when you're reading through lyra viol music, it doesn't make any sense sometimes to start the trill on the main note, but start it with the upper note like we do in French music. So those two questions together, what's your take on the Ferrabosco, the Lacrymae? It's by Ferrabosco, the Lacrymae, maybe. And what do you think? What do you people think about starting the shakes on the upper note instead of the main note, like in Mace?
I mean, so for the shakes question first, I draw your attention to the prelude at the bottom of page 3 of the PDF. Mm-hmm. There, as you kind of have a go through it at your leisure, but the thing that I kind of really found is that oftentimes these little vertical lines, so the shake or beat or whatever you want to call it, is seems to me to have a very like physical release aspect to it. That the ornament is kind of just a way of letting go of a hold. So for example, like at the beginning of the third line there, in that piece, you have this this chord. And there, I think it would be kind of weird to go. And it feels much more logical to go.
Exactly. I totally agree with you, but it contradicts what Mace says, and for the lute, maybe the lute is something different than the viol. I totally agree with you. There's so many times like that, it doesn't seem to make any sense at all to start with a main note, as Mace says. But
I have to go back to Mason, reread that again because it wasn't my memory of it, but I did. In the handout. There's an extract from his lute ornamentation section where he talks about it. But of course, I find he expresses things in the most unbelievably roundabout ways.
that's
That sometimes it's hard to know which way is up. Regarding the Ferrabosco suggestion, I don't know. I that piece is one that it's like it's on the wish list. It's on the keep meaning to get around to it list of things. And I think the only thing that's stopping me from really spending time with it is just that feeling of needing to finish the ornamented version of the end of the C section.
Well, I did it. David Safra did this, so there's two versions already. But we're not going to give it to you. So you have to do your own first.
Okay. But yeah, I think it's absolutely astonishing. I mean, the first time I read it, I was just like, "Oh my god, this is so beautiful." So,
Joelle, can you chime in about this, or even somebody that other people? What I think is Dr. Callan in Canada said he really thought it was Ferrabosco also, but it's all conjecture. I don't know anybody else has been through it.
I don't know if I have an opinion about whether it's Ferrabosco or not, but I do have a word of caution just because the lyra repertoire spans such an extensive period of time. And so when we're talking about Mace and his interpretation or application of ornaments from 1676 and applying it retroactively to music of Merro that was composed in the first half of the century, I'm not sure that they would be the same ornaments or that they should be the same ornaments or that they would have done them the same way. And we have repertoire, not just English repertoire, but continental repertoire also added to the mix by the end of the century. So again, I don't have an answer. I just have a word of caution that we take each source and we look at it and we try to make decisions that are true to the period of that source, but they don't necessarily relate to some of these other few sources that we have at our disposal. And then on top of that, we are modern performers, and ornaments are an expression of individuality. So I think one of the elements of Liam's presentation that I loved the most was that he showed this incredible variety of different ways of interpreting, and how, depending on how you feel that day, perhaps you would have some freedom to make those choices. That's all I have to say.
Yeah, Mary Sear also makes that point in her article from the 70s that, that our study of the historical ornamentation is still at its root the study of a kind of improvisatory and inspirational practice.
Of course, I keep harping on about our Villeneuve manuscript in France. It's much later, but this is the first time we've had very, very clear instructions exactly how long an appoggiatura is supposed to be, how long a trill is supposed to be, what kind of trill you're supposed to play, etc. Christophe Coin has done a lot more work than I have about that, especially about the appoggiatura. And it's, of course, it's not the same country, it's 100 years later, but this time the French got very specific exactly how they wanted each ornament to be played, whether it be brilliant or be a soft ornament, or such to be longer appoggiatura or shorter appoggiatura. It's absolutely amazing, and it's obsessional. So that's why maybe also where I'm coming from. I began so conscious that if my trill is a little too long for what was written in this manuscript, then I was wondering when I go back to Merro, well, am I playing the trill in the correct fashion? I think Joel's right. I think we should be more open-minded about and be aware of what the time of the day is or what month it is or whatever.
There was another. I'll make another confession along these lines. In the Farrant, Pav and Fantasia, there's this one lick where it goes in the. Well, I'll tell you where.
on the yes. Oh, yes, here we are. On the 1, 2, 3, on the fourth line in the second bar, he asks you to go all the way up above the frets on the third and fourth strings. And I don't know if any of the astute observers realized that I played. Oh, sorry. I'm playing all the wrong notes now because I'm trying to watch myself in mirror on the television while I do it. But
Leon, you're going to get a ticket from the police for doing that. You can't do that.
Well, I don't know.
The lyra via police are out there for that.
The first time I did it, it was because I couldn't make the the Y, the above the fret note on the low strings sound nice. But then the more time that I've been living in this world, the more I was kind of able to almost make it sound nice. But then I kind of figured at the same time, like, what is the piece? You know, does it stop being Daniel Farran's piece if I add if I revoice one chord in a way that is also feels very historical and idiomatically appropriate to the instrument? It's kind of like, yeah. I mean, this is I guess I'm answering my own question as I pointed out, but it's the same thing as like. Sometimes in Forqueray there are fingerings where you can see from the fingering that he gives that he's going for a very particular type of resonance, and it makes sense what he's asking you to do. But then there are other ways of sometimes playing the chord that are less taxing on the left hand. And so if you're doing it at the beginning of a recital, you might follow his fingerings. And if you're doing it at the end of the recital when your hand is tired, you might switch to the thing that feels easier.
Did you? Sorry, I don't want to hog the conversation. But did you check if there's another source for that Farran piece, and maybe with a different fingering of that as you did?
Yes, there is a different source. It has the same fingering. It's in the Cambridge 5.20, which is at the end of your PDF actually. The fingering is the same, but the rhythms are slightly different. Both sources are a little flawed. Don't always agree with each other in different places, and so that bar is another instance where I just sort of kind of silently corrected to the thing that felt most idiomatically natural. I know that that's a really dangerous practice, correcting old sources to what we feel like they should be. But in that case, I kind of meditated on it for a while and decided that it was okay.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thomas Monk has a question.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, Liam. A fascinating talk. Can I raise a question of the relationship to normal notation? I'm thinking of, Laws and Jenkins write both in tab and in what I call conventional notation, if you forgive the rather crude expression. But I also take Joel's point, which is very important about the timing. And I was wondering whether, I think at one stage you were suggesting that we can learn something about ornamentation for conventionally notated music using the tablature ornamentation. You didn't go into very much detail about that, but you'll know the Jenkins divisions that where one of the parts, it's in the fretwork edition, they've reproduced the original marks, whatever they might be. It's one of the divisions for two bass viols. And I just wonder whether you have any comments on ornamentation in conventional, that might be transferred to conventional notation. We have tended to play a lot of Jenkins and Law's consort music, even the very difficult stuff, as it's, well, ostensibly written. But I think if I understood you rightly, you were suggesting that we actually probably ought to free ourselves from the fetters and think of ornamenting all sorts of stuff, including, particularly the small scale stuff like the Jenkins for two bass viols. You could easily add a whole pile of ornamentation in a lot of those. Any thoughts on that?
I think it's important whenever we talk about ornamentation that we distinguish between the two kind of subcategories of ornamentation, that being graces and divisions or diminutions or whatever you want to call it. So ornamentation, which is essentially making counterpoint more florid, and then the graces, which are kind of the thing that we see a lot in lyra sources, where the little kind of twiddles on the notes. And also important to remind ourselves that at every point in history that we have written evidence about the practice of ornamentation, there's always someone complaining about someone else doing it not the way they want them to do it. And so, again, it's a situation where there's no hard and fast answer. I think it's just very important to think really artistically about the expressive nature of every tool, and what is the rhetorical significance of an elevation when you go bom, it's an ornament that, as to go back to Mace, that Mace is saying, like, this was used before, but is not very much used in our time anymore. Kind of him referencing that kind of stylistic break that Joel was referring to. That it is an ornamental gesture that feels much more at home in the Elizabethan Jacobean repertoire. But then in consort music, it kind of also depends. Like, is the consort music in question an almain, or is the consort music in question a pavan, or is it a fantasia? I mean, in this one little section of the Merro, that anonymous fantasia we see with absolutely zero ornaments in it. Then the pavan by Joseph Shirley has like bazillions of them. But then interestingly, the Merro copies the Galliard by Joseph Shirley with many rhythmical mistakes and no ornaments whatsoever. But the same piece is in Manchester, and I included that at the back of the PDF as well. And there you see it with the correct, with rhythms that make more sense to me, and a bit more use of ornaments. And in that case, he actually uses, in Manchester, there are those elevations, those burri things, even though by the time that Manchester was being copied, they were kind of already stylistically a little bit on the way out, if we understand correctly. But then one other, just to go back to the consort question, I think it's, if you're playing a fantasia, maybe it's important to think about division, and not necessarily in the kind of super fast way, but just in the adding maybe a little bit of a passing note. Confession, when I'm playing consort music, fantasias, I will often turn a minim into a dotted crotchet quaver just to correct my bow direction. Just to make the gestures kind of feel right. It's the counterpoint is a florid and fluid thing. So we, can be free with it sometimes. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Any other questions for Liam? If not, I think it's probably time to wrap up. So thank you very much for attending, everyone. And thank you, Liam, for giving a very interesting...
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your patience with the internet.
Thank you. So take care, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Bye.